Hey everyone, welcome back to another Author Tidbits. I remembered the name. I haven't for the last two recordings because that's just how I roll. But so pat on my back for remembering that today. Today I have author Esther Hatch with me. Esther is like one of my besties. I absolutely adore spending time with her because she's hysterical. She brings
I'm
out.
nodding not because I'm hysterical. I'm an author too.
But we have a lot of fun together.
Yes, we have a lot of fun.
And we don't see nearly enough of each other,
No,
which is ridiculous because we only live like 12 minutes away from each other. But
18 probably.
18 minutes.
I don't know exactly, but it's not 12.
I think it depends on. I don't know. It was under 20 minutes when I came to deliver Creo Brew. So anyway, point is we're pretty close to each other. So we really should spend more time together, but hashtag writing books, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, so today we are going to talk about first lines and, how a first line maybe affects a book. Is it important? Is it not important? I think there are varying schools of thought on this. So we are going to give you ours, which is only one. Granted, it's not the the end all be all. But so we're just going to kind of chat about this and see. We are going to pull out some of our favorite first lines and even some from our books and some of our probably less successful first lines from our books. And we'll maybe look at them and see how if we would do them different now, right? After we've learned all this, our vast knowledge that we now have.
Yes.
So maybe let's start first off with your very favorite first line.
My very, very favorite first line of
all time. Do you have a very favorite?
That's a good question. Well, I feel like I'm going to steal probably a very popular one, but Pride and Prejudice is very hard to beat, right?
It truly
is. Everyone knows that line. I think I even have used that line as one of my, like a variant on it, and knew that people would know what I was doing. So I think it's hard to beat. Well, now I feel like I should have had it on hand because I want to read it because I don't want to mess it up. But what's the first word?
It is a truth universally acknowledged, right?
Yes.
That a gentleman in possession of a large fortune must be in want of a wife. Right? Something. I might.
Boy, we're doing great, Mindy.
Pretty close.
Pretty close.
The thing I find so interesting about that one, though, is that it's not. I mean, you see that even outside of literature circles. Do you know what I mean? I mean, you see that in commercials and for weird things. I would like to say I've even seen it on a deodorant commercial. I'm not sure that that's true, but in the back of my head, I'm like, I seriously think I've seen an advertisement, that, a woman in possession of body odor, it's so easy to
must be in
want what you need, right?
of a natural deodorant.
So I think that one is but I think it's like Dickens. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It's another one of those that I think kind of spans. And I think people who may not even know where it comes from still know the quote.
Like that thing that everybody says
and use it.
Sometimes
they just don't know where it comes from, which I think is probably the true mark of a great.
Well, and that first line is like extremely long. We were discussing a little bit before, and Mindy pulled out one of hers, and she's like, "This is a really long first line." I'm like, pretty sure that line is a paragraph. I don't think there's a period in that paragraph. Maybe there is. It's been
in which one? Dickens.
It was the best of times. It was the worst of the times. It was the age of. I can't remember. But
I think it gets shortened a lot.
Usually just do the first part.
But so that's kind of the mark, right?
Yeah. Oh, that's what we're going for.
Well, that's what we're going for, which I'm not sure I've ever met. Well, no, I'm not sure. Yeah, I've never met that line, but that's what we try for, right?
Yeah.
So Give me some of your other favorite first lines, and I will give you some of mine.
So the reason we kind of brainstorm topics of what we talk about, and one of the reasons I wanted to talk about this one, first lines, is because it's something I use when I go to elementary schools, because I like to just get people excited about books. And for some reason, first lines are just a fun way to help people realize how important books are, and in an odd way. It's like you said, it was the best of times, it's the worst of times. You hear that, you know what it means. It's from something, at least, and so it's really fun with elementary school kids and things to just open up a first line and see if the kids recognize it, if they know where it came from. But so some of my favorite.
Some more classics. Oh, your sound went off. You muted.
Okay. I think my mic died. I have it plugged in. So now I'm just on my computer mic. Sorry, can you cut that in post-production?
Now you're going to make me learn how to edit.
Oh, no. Okay. Cool. Don't do it. Sorry, guys. We're not going to make Mindy figure that out. My mic died. Deal with it. So some of the ones I have are from younger books, but I really love them. Like, for example, There's No Lake at Camp Green Lake. Do you know what that's from, Mindy?
I don't.
It's from Holes. Have you? So it's.
Oh,
it's,
no,
it's
I've never even seen that movie. Is that?
Yeah.
I mean, it's one of those that even when I say I've never read Georgette Hare, I feel a little bit like, oh, I've never even seen the movie.
Yeah. No. And I haven't read very much Georgette Hare. I read one and then didn't love it, and then finally read a different one and loved it. So I was like, oh, okay, I get it now. So I was slow to get on that bandwagon because I made a mistake in my first choice. But that's from Holes, and it's such a good line because, like, if you've read the book, you will immediately know that's where it's from. Right. And the other thing is, it really does set up the setting too. So the Green Lake is this camp they send troubled kids to. And it's called Camp Green Lake. And he talks about how that sounds like such a nice camp, but the lake has dried up and all they do at this camp is dig holes. Like, that's all they get to do at this Camp Green Lake. So anyway, I love that first line. It's a great one.
Well, I think you hit a point there where it kind of tells you what you're in for, kind of sets the tone.
Yes. Yeah.
Which is important.
It is. Yeah.
Okay.
Do you have something for me to give you more?
One of my very favorites, and this is a book I read long before I was ever a writer, but it says, apparently, weddings are breeding grounds for disaster.
It's a good first line. I'm like, I'm in. I will read that. What is that?
Yeah, it's called Previously Engaged.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And she's one of my favorite authors. She's one of the few that I laugh out loud when I read her books.
Yeah.
There aren't many authors that can make me laugh out loud.
Yeah.
Some can make me smile.
I should have looked up more of my adult favorites.
Yeah. Because yours are most, okay, give me this kids list.
Well, I mean, not all of them are like, and not all of them are books I like. For example, last night I dreamt I went to Manderley again. Do you know what book that is? I think we have similar opinions about this book. Last night I dreamt I went to Manderley again.
No, have I read this? It's from what?
Rebecca.
Oh, I've never read Rebecca. Oh. Probably because I've heard you talk about it.
So. Really? And I'm sorry. Like, okay, no one not follow me because I don't love that book, but I don't. But I think it is a good line. Although maybe not as much if you have. A lot of these are good if you've read them. I need to find. Okay, let me find one that I know you've read. Okay, how about this one? Mr. and Mrs. Dursley of number 4 Private Drive were proud to say they were perfectly normal. Thank you very much.
That is a good first line. I hadn't even thought of Harry Potter's.
Yeah. But what a good first line, right?
But what a good first line. Yeah.
A really good first line.
Yeah.
Like,
which, I guess is partially why she is J.K. Rowling, right?
Yeah. But I mean, right away, you like we talked about, there's some setting there.
Yeah.
But more importantly, there's that feeling of like, we're perfectly normal. Thank you very much, which establishes that some people aren't. normal, right?
Right.
And
Well,
they
and it
would
also makes you wonder if they really are normal, because if you have to tell people you're normal, are you really normal?
yeah,
You
yeah,
know?
yeah. So I think that's like a really excellent first line. Um,
Uh,
yeah.
what about, let's see, mine are on my phone, so I have to. Um, this one I think is interesting. I'm not sure. Okay, it says Maggie. So, Maggie, so like a text message.
Okay.
Here's the deal, mom. I don't want to do this, which I think is quite intriguing. And if you've read the book, it makes a lot more. It's another one of those that it makes sense if you've read the.
Yeah.
Have you ever read The Accidental Text?
Yes. Yeah.
I love that book.
Yeah.
But that right there is really, um, it does kind of tell you. And then there's this one. Becky Monson has a lot of good ones, I think. But I'm convinced that any compliment I've ever been given was somehow done by charity, by a family member or a friend.
Oh, that's such a good first line. I
That's
need
a
to do
very
that
good
some
first
more.
line.
I feel like I've leaned too heavily on young fiction. I
Oh,
should.
yeah. What else have you got?
Well, this is my personal favorite book. So
Okay.
I keep bringing up ones that it's like, so if it's not your personal favorite book, you probably won't get it. It's There Was No Possibility of Taking a Walk That Day. Do you know that one?
No.
Well, actually, it's my it's my favorite book growing up, but Jane Eyre, which
Oh,
um, when you know the book, you're like,
yeah.
she's just not happy at the home
Right.
she's at all. So it's like not taking a walk is a terrible thing for her. So
So, how do you feel about first lines that are direct quotes?
I'm fine with it. Like if somebody's speaking, is that what you
Yeah.
mean? I am
Or I
great.
guess I should say
Yeah,
dialogue.
yeah, dialogue. I think I have some that are that way. And I remember thinking through like, do I really want to start a book with dialogue?
Well,
And I
because
was
I think sometimes
like,
in classes there there's teaching that is you never start with dialogue.
yeah,
You don't open a chapter with dialogue, you don't open a book with dialogue. But I'm not sure I agree with that.
yeah. I feel like I don't agree with too many things that say never.
I would agree.
So never agree with, no, I'm just kidding. Well, so for me, I I think it's things that when people say never to do something, I think the right thing to do is to dig deeper and say, why do they say that? Like, what can be the problem with starting with dialogue? And did you fall into that trap if that's how you're starting? Does that make, like, to me, that's what I think of when
Yeah.
people say never do this or always do that. Or I think it's more important to find out because a lot of times, like, my instinct is to like be like, oh, don't tell me never. I'm just going to do it, whatever. So I don't always agree with nevers, but also I think usually they come from a place of knowledge. There's
I
probably a good
think
reason not to.
I think when I hear never or always, I'm like you, my first instinct is don't tell me what I can't do
Yeah,
or
yeah.
don't tell me what I have to do. And so the rebellion in me, because we all know how rebellious I am.
Mindy's rebellious, guys.
My
Crazy.
most rebellious act was, I think, to chew an entire pack of gum at one time. But anyway, but this is how I exhibit my rebellion. My first thing is, how can I break that rule, but do it
Well,
acceptably?
yeah.
You know what I mean? Because
Mhm.
now I'm like, okay, well, now I want to break that rule. So it's like you never start, or you never even have your character look in the mirror. Mirror scenes are, oh, they're
Yeah.
terrible. But I think mirror scenes are fine as
I think
long
they
as
are too.
there's a reason for it, and
Yeah,
more than just to describe what they look like.
exactly. I
I
think
never use a mirror to describe.
yeah. I mean, I might describe some things about it, but I'm not using that as like my way to describe my main character. And I think
Right.
that's where it gets a bad rap,
Uh-huh.
is too often people were like, especially I think if you're in first person or something, and you're like, how do I describe what people want to know what my main character looks like?
Right.
The easiest way to do that from your main character's eyes is to look in a mirror. Well, it got totally overused
Yeah.
and it's kind of just a telling situation
Right.
first of all. But I do think like we both write historical romance and there is a lot and people want to know what people are wearing, what
Yeah.
jewelry they have on. Like that's part of the fun. And so I definitely have scenes where her maid, like she's talking to her maid and maybe they're in front of the mirror. So it's not like that's the only reason they're there.
Yeah.
And she fixes something with her hair, and so it tells you what her hair looks like without just saying like her hair was brown in the mirror, and it contrasted her green eyes, like
Right. Well, I know, which it didn't make it into the book, but when I was writing one of my books, the first line was, she was it said Rose Allen stared at herself in the mirror, and then it was her thought as
mm,
she looked in her eyes and said, there used to be kindness there.
yeah,
What
yeah.
happened? But I think I chickened out and I took it out,
That,
even though
yeah, I wouldn't
it
have.
wasn't saying what she looked like.
Yeah, I think the hard thing about that is like you hear people who learn these roles and then they'll read it and go like, she's starting with a mirror,
Yeah.
big mistake. Even though I think in that instance, it's great. I took an author class once and I can't remember the book, but it did start with someone looking in the mirror and the author was like, the teacher was just like, this is an amazing opening scene.
Yeah.
But it was because it was a twist on that. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like you can take some things that are overdone and twist them and use them in a creative new way. Yeah.
Yeah.
Works sometimes.
So, yeah, that's me. I'm always I can't do that.
Yeah. But I do think like
Want to bet?
if you're gonna buck the trend of what the advice is, like first you have to study that advice.
Right.
That's my advice.
You have to know the reasoning behind it.
You have to know the reason, or else you're just gonna maybe fall into the trap without realizing what the trap is.
Right. It's knowledgeable rebellion.
Yes. Yes. We like to rebel with knowledge.
With knowledge. Exactly. Okay. What else have you got?
For first lines, other ones I love. So I love this one, and this one doesn't matter if you've read it or not. You'll know what book it is. It is Every Boy Except One Grows Up.
Is that Peter Pan?
That's Peter Pan. Yeah.
Is that the original with J.M. Barrie?
I'm pretty sure. I'm pretty sure. Yeah. Like that one I haven't read, so I got that off of a list back when I was making my presentations, and that's my understanding is that is the first line of that book. Anybody listening to this can, if they have a copy, go look it up and make sure. Or Mindy's doing that now.
I'm actually not. I was looking at something else. Because I think that's a great line.
I love that line. Yeah. Well, and it's kind of nostalgic. Like I think there's something about that line that you're like it evokes some feelings. Like I am not like a Peter Pan fanatic, but it almost makes me tear up to say that line. And I'm probably just a teary up person, but but like I think that's a cool thing about that line. If your first line can evoke such emotion, I think that's a pretty cool thing.
Have you ever read Peter and the Starcatchers?
I don't think I have. No.
Oh, I love those books, actually. They're very, very good. They're kids' books, though. But the reason, because it is based on Peter Pan.
Okay.
It's how Peter became Peter.
Oh, yeah.
Actually. And so I was just looking at him to see, because sometimes I think when you do homages or, sometimes I think authors tend to pull those in. So I was wondering if he had a similar one for his first line, but he doesn't. Although it's still the tired old carriage pulled by two tired old horses rumbled onto the wharf, its creaky wheels bumpity bumping on the uneven planks, waking Peter from his restless slumber.
Yeah. I mean, even that is kind of a cool, with the word old being used twice. I think I have like mixed feelings because I think back to like my English days in high school, and I'd be like, you guys are trying to make us analyze things that I don't think the author meant to put in there, but I doubt that that's a mistake or like, I'm sure that's intentional. The word old being put in there twice.
Right. And I will say I had that same thing. I was like, oh, come on. You cannot tell me F. Scott Fitzgerald put a green light at the end of the pier in The Great Gatsby to symbolize hope. He just likes the color green.
Yeah.
But I will say since I've become an author, there are things that I'm like, maybe they did do that on purpose.
They did. Maybe they did.
So do you know this one? It was the oak tree that distracted me.
Yeah. I know what that is. That's Edenbrook, right?
It is Edenbrook.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, but I think it's so interesting, on books that you have read and you loved, when you hear those first lines, it like evokes
Yeah. So
some sort of emotion, right?
yeah. So even if it's not like that, if I hadn't read the book, I might not be like, "Oh, that's the best first line ever." But it immediately brings you to like what happens next in the
Right.
story. And so it's the best line for that book maybe. And I think
Yeah.
that sometimes as authors we have to make that decision of like, well, I'm not F. Scott Fitzgerald or even Jane Austen. Like maybe my first line just needs to bring the reader right into the story, and
Right.
that's fine too. So
How's this one? Miss Mary Bennet could do nothing to stop her life from shattering to pieces, so she played the pianoforte.
oh, I love that.
Isn't that a
It
great
must
first
be a
line?
retelling of what is it?
It's not. It's The Secret Life of Miss Mary Bennet. Have you
Oh,
seen? It's a um,
but it
it's a
is like
spy
maybe
series.
is it like actually Mary
Yeah,
Bennett?
yeah. So it's when her father dies. So Mary or Elizabeth and Jane are already married,
Yeah,
and Lydia, obviously.
yeah,
And so uh, it's when their father dies.
yeah. I
Anyway,
like that. That's a good opening line.
isn't that a good
I
opening
should have
line?
opened up some more books. I'm like looking what's behind me.
I know
I
I
should
have
have
my phone.
prepared.
So I guess the next question is, if the line is not great, does that stop you from reading? I mean, do you look at a first line and you go, well, that's kind of dull?
I would say almost never would a first line stop me from reading a book. Actually, the only one I would
You're
say
going
that
to amend that?
I'm gonna go back to my childhood and I will amend this. I started To Kill a Mockingbird at least 14 times, and I could not get past the first page of that book. I didn't understand who the narrators were. And like this is me 12 or 13 years old. And I think it was just a leap for my literature understanding. Even
Yeah.
though I read like Jane Austen, but like I couldn't understand who the narrators were on that first page. And I don't know if it was the first line. I think the first line has something about Jem breaking his arm, but Jem is spelled with Jem. I didn't know if that was a boy or a girl. I didn't
Mm.
Scout. I didn't know if it's a boy or girl. I didn't know who these people were. I don't know. So that's the only book ever that I would say like that. It maybe wasn't the first line, but the first page. At a young age, I really struggled with that one. And so I started that book like 6 or 7 times at least before I finally read it, and I love the book. Like absolutely love it. It was a deep dive for me. That one was. But other than that, I can't think of a single book that I was ever like, "Oh, I hate this first line."
Yeah.
Or like, "This is a mediocre first line. Throw it across the room." I feel like it's actually just something that authors can do, not that they must.
Well, and I feel like probably there are more mediocre lines. Well, I don't even think it's a probably. I would say that there's by far more mediocre lines,
Yeah.
first lines, than truly great lines.
Even like some of the ones I shared them because they were my favorite books. But if you haven't read the book, they could be considered mediocre. It's just like they evoke memories of the book for those who have read them.
Right.
So I agree with that. I think most books just get the book started.
Yeah.
And I will say this as a writer, um, I would never pause on my first line and wait to write the rest of the book until I get it just right. I almost always write that one of the last things,
I
or
do too.
or at least amend it
Yeah.
last.
Well,
You know,
because I think I don't know about you. I'm not a plotter. So
nope.
for the most part, when I start my books, I don't know my characters very well for the
Yeah,
most part, unless they've been shown a lot in previous books, in a series. Then I tend to have a little bit more of a grasp on them, which is for a whole nother
yes.
thing, because
We could
sometimes I'm not sure that that's good or
I'm the
not
same. I am
to
the same.
know them that well. And so I find that when I first start it, then I don't really know enough about him to have that great line,
Yeah.
which is why
I
most of the time it starts out with, he stepped from the carriage onto the sidewalk in front of Almux, which isn't great, but you're already at Almax, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah, so I was gonna say
obviously,
it's not terrible, you know where they are,
yeah.
you know, you
So, um, and I think when I first started writing, that's kind of was my thought. Well, I'm just starting the story. This is how it
yeah,
would start. I think
yeah,
it's only been as I've written longer that I have gone, I want some of those first lines though that kind of grab you.
yeah. Well, and the interesting thing about a first line is, um, it's something you can get away with having a almost different tone from the rest of the chapter. Like, you can put
Mhm,
like, so I'm gonna use my first we were pulling out, I'm like, "Oh, I wonder what my first book's first line was, Roses of Feldstone." I know I started it with her in a carriage, which is, maybe that's also advised against, but I didn't know those rules at the time. This was just
what's
my
advised against?
starting, like, on a drive or in a carriage, like, so well, or in a car going somewhere is what I heard, and I was like, "Well, that's basically in a carriage for our time period." So, like, my original first line was, like, the air thickening in the carriage because she's just, like, nervous to get to Feldstone Manor. But then after writing the whole book, I think I must have thought, like, "I want a good first line," so I added one, and I just added it to the top, like, and then the next line has her in the carriage. So, and it just says, "I should have begged my parents to let me stay in London with Elizabeth." I don't think it's an amazing first line, but it does maybe, like, set at least her emotions a little bit
Mhm.
more in place. But I also just think it's interesting that a lot of times you can just put a sentence above where you started before. And that one's not even maybe the best example because it is still just throwing you in. There's one of Joanna Barker's
See,
with
and
the
I don't,
I really love her first line. I'm gonna find that one.
okay, I don't see the problem in being in a carriage. What if that's your inciting incident?
See, that's your rebellious nature.
That
I
is
knew
my
you wouldn't have
rebellious
a
nature.
problem
I
with
mean, what
I
if you're
knew you wouldn't have a problem with
going to
it.
have a carriage accident, you know? I mean,
Oh yeah.
okay, which brings me now I might have to try and find this one because there is one with a carriage accident and I want to know if they started it there.
Well,
Let's
so
see.
I think again, I mean, I left it in there. I can't remember when I heard that. It might have been after it came out even. But I feel like again, it's more of I think the point was don't start your character in the middle of two things. Like, because you're on a car going somewhere, it's kind of like just put them where they're at instead, like take them to the location and start there versus, I don't know. I can't remember. It's been a long time since I heard. Okay, so Joanna Barker has one that I think is really fun. Her first line in The Truth About Miss Ashbourne, and it definitely has that feeling of like the story starts in the next line. And this is just a line she put it in front, which I think is really cool. It says, "A governess must be a model of modesty and decorum." I mean, that's the first line, but then it goes on. "She should speak with deference, act with propriety, and aspire toward all that is genteel, refined, and respectable." So, and then it takes you into like what's actually going on in the story. So I think it's kind of a cool thing. I don't mind when authors do that. They just plug in a little, like, I'm going to just tell you a little bit about this book at the beginning.
Mhm.
Um, Twilight starts that way too, which I'm not making any assumptions about, except for that Twilight was a phenomenon in the nation. But it just said, "I've never given much thought to how I would die, but dying for someone you loved is a good way to go," or something like that. And I'm like, it's a good first line, but it's not actually have to do with anything that's happening in that first scene. So I
Mhm.
think it's kind of cool when authors do something like that.
So I mean well, and I guess that's the thing is it's a I don't know that I guess what okay, that was like a whole lot of nothing. I think the point is that there really is no right or wrong way, right?
Right.
It's what works for the
And I think even more so than almost anything in your book, there's no right or wrong way.
yeah.
Like not too often in a book can you like separate yourself from the action and just be like, I'm going to just do a little exposition about what a governess should be, like,
Right.
or I'm going to tell you about how I think about dying sometimes. And, like that normally anywhere else in the book would feel out of place. But like you can throw it in right at the beginning and it's kind of, it can be, you know,
Yeah.
there's a word I'm looking for, but I don't have it. So, like I was going to say poetic license, maybe is what
Yeah.
I'm thinking.
Okay, so do you have a favorite first line you've written?
I think so. I didn't go back and look at all of mine, but I definitely know I worked at this one probably about the hardest. I rewrote it hundreds of times, I'm pretty sure. And it often turned into 2 sentences, which really bothered me. And so I had to even finesse it because I wanted it to be my first opening line. So my opening line for A Proper Scoundrel is probably my favorite. And it goes, there were 2 types of men who walked through the door of Diana Barton's officer on Rochester Street: legitimate men of business and those who utterly wasted her time.
Oh, that is a good one. I remember that one.
Yeah.
That is a good one.
I think I probably wrote that after reading Joanna Barker's and was like, hey, I can just put something in there at the beginning that sets everything up. And and was like, that's a really cool thing. And then just everything else I'd learned from first lines afterwards, going like, it's fine to like have some exposition right there at the beginning. So I did.
And I think sometimes it's not just a first line, but maybe the first few.
Yeah. I know. I've been okay without my dash in there, but I worked really hard to make it a first.
Yeah. Because I had a line similar to that where I was like, this really should just be 1, but it really is 2. Because it's a duke's opinion was always right, at least in the eyes of a duke.
Oh, that is awesome.
And so
Love that.
Anyway, so I think I'm not sure that I did like that line, and I actually didn't even remember I had written it until just now.
Yeah, like what if all of mine have great first lines and I can't remember them?
I know. I don't know that I would say any of mine have great first lines, but I do think that I have some that are better than others.
I'm like rating my shelves. I can't remember any of my first lines.
That
one's good, but I'm not worth wasting everyone's time on.
So
I start with dialogue, boom, in this one. So
my very first book, I started with dialogue.
Yeah.
And that was even after like going through classes and all of that. I still decided, but it was done thoughtfully.
Yeah. I don't know how much that one was done thoughtfully. I do think I like asked someone what their opinion was and then went with it.
But. Well, mine was, we're not in Pennsylvania anymore.
Oh,
because he's an American who's just come to England.
I'm going to read mine and you're going to laugh because mine is, what have you done to your dress? Like, I mean, maybe if I was going to break a rule, it might not have been on that, but that's okay.
So I think that, I just think it's interesting. You know, the one that I said about the mirror?
Yeah.
Do you want to know what it turned out to be?
Yeah.
I think I probably should have just kept it what it was. Hold on, I've got so many windows open now. So it starts out now as Rose Allen stepped from the carriage, caressing the pearls at her neck as she looked up at the illuminated yellow stone facade of Lord Trenton's London townhome.
So that was a carriage, not a mirror.
Right, but that was the one that I was telling you that initially
it used to be a mirror.
It used to start out with her saying, I remember when there was kindness there.
I'm like, I didn't hear the mirror in there.
Yeah, no.
You're not really in the carriage. You're getting out of the carriage. That's just sad.
So no, it got changed, and that's what it got changed to.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure if it was better or not, you know. Maybe I should have been brave.
I'm looking for like one last book of mine, but I can't remember. Okay, I will say one funny thing. So The Roses of Feldstone, did I read that one to you guys? I did to Mindy, but it was that I should have stayed in London with that one. I think I did read it on here. So then I wrote a sister book to it that's just a novella in this Christmas collection. And it's her sister, Elizabeth. So Rose starts her story. And my favorite thing is when people notice this. A few people did. So Rose's story, The Roses of Feldstone start, I should have begged my parents to stay in London with Rose or with Elizabeth. And so, but then my short story of her sister starts with, I should have begged my parents to let me stay at home with Rose. So I don't know, like it's not an amazing first line, but it means something to me personally. And like I had a couple of readers catch it and it was a really fun thing to do. So
it's kind of an Easter egg.
Yeah, it's kind of, that one was an Easter egg. And especially for a novella, I think that's kind of fun because it doesn't even get sold separately or anything like that. So it's not like I'm trying to grab somebody necessarily with the very first line.
Right. Okay. So I guess my final question is, after this chat, is it going to change the way you do or think about your first lines?
I think so. I mean, well, a lot of what we've said are things that I've thought about as
Yeah.
I've been writing, but I would say like over the course of my author career, I've learned a little bit about this. But I think my number one thing, and I don't know if people listening are authors or readers or what, but I think my number one advice, and we already mentioned it, is like not to worry about it until the end. So, and as far as how I do things, that's still how I do it. Like I'm in the middle of a book and I can't spend 2 or 3 hours thinking about the first line, you know? So
Right.
when I finish the book, that's when I will try and see if I want this one to be something witty and clever, or if I just want to jump right into the action and just pull the readers into where they're at. And it'll probably just depend on the book.
Well, you know, there's that statistic that says that like only 2% or 3% of anyone who starts a book actually finishes it.
Writing them.
Writing them.
I was gonna say, this is writing, not reading.
Writing. Yes, writing a book.
That'd be a very sad statistic.
And I think that's part of it. I think people get so hung up on that first line in that
Yes.
first chapter
that
they never move past.
I started writing my first book like 30 years ago, probably. Am I that old? Probably 25 years ago. And I had one good paragraph and then couldn't come up with anything else. And it still wasn't as good of a paragraph as I thought it was. I mean, like, as I just kept trying to tweak it. I was like, I thought this would be better. I thought this would be better. And then I just gave up on writing, like, and with no clue that like writing is getting the story on the paper. I don't know.
Right. Well, and really and truly, I think most brilliance in actual phrasing comes through editing.
At least anything ever kind of brilliant in my books does, for sure.
I think
literally put a clever metaphor here.
Which then doesn't editing you just hate you.
Yeah, and then I just say like, never mind, I can't think of a clever metaphor. It's a better author that will come up with that.
But I think that the brilliance also is getting the story on the paper.
Yeah.
And getting the thoughts of this is how it's going to happen. And then you go through and edit, which I hate editing with every like vein, pulse, everything, you know, with the heat of a bajillion suns. I hate editing.
Look at your beautiful language though.
I know, isn't it? It's so flowy. Why do I not write like that? But I will say that in editing, because that's when a lot of the this would be so much better way to say this.
Yeah.
Well, and then I'll be like, oh yeah, that really was kind of good.
Yeah. And even not just the wording, but like I often don't know what my book is really about until the end. And so then suddenly you start seeing like, oh, this scene is where I really like, let's say the theme of the book is like be yourself or something. And then I see scenes within the book where they're giving examples of that. And then I say like, okay, I'm going to make these 3 paragraphs just prettier because they go with my theme and I want to make that more noticeable to the readers. So,
yeah. Well, and I think sometimes the brilliance is there. It's just not phrased well. It's not phrased
a lot of times.
It's phrased very clunkily.
Yes. Yeah.
With a whole lot more words than it needs.
Yeah. Yes.
So anyway.
Or not enough words. One or the other.
One or the other. It's just not right.
It's just not right.
So I think probably the moral of the story is don't worry about the first line.
Right. Don't worry about it.
Continue on. Write that first line. And if they're in a carriage, if they're looking in a mirror, that's fine. Continue on.
Why they're there.
Continue on.
Yep.
Right? Well, and even if they are looking in the mirror and describing themselves.
If you feel like you need to.
Yeah. Figure it out later, but at least move on with the story.
Yep.
So awesome. I always love chatting with you.
I know. It's fun.
It's so fun. We should go to lunch.
We need to. Like
we won't video it,
the distance, it's like 8 minutes apart.
I know. Maybe we just need to move closer.
I'm sure that's our problem.
Oh no, I think our problem is that we're both trying to like write books
and do other things even.
And like have a life.
Yeah.
You do that? Wow, I mean, good for you.
I probably shouldn't, but I do.
All right, we will wrap it up. Thank you all for
Yes.
joining us. I hope you learned something about first lines. And we will see you next time. Don't forget to subscribe so that you will be notified whenever anything new is put up. Thanks. Bye.
Thanks, Mindy. Bye.